Welcome back to LA Catholic Morning here on Archangel Radio. I'm Todd, Sylvester with Michelle McAloon, my greats at the Command Center. We continue our series with Duncan Stroik, who is a professor of architecture at Notre Dame. As we're looking at some of the cathedrals and basilicas here in the United States, we move to Richmond, Virginia for the Sacred Heart Cathedral located there. Good morning, Duncan.
Hey, good morning. It's great to go to Richmond with you.
That's great. Well, you know what? I couldn't find a virtual tour of it, but looking at this cathedral, it looks like the Mobile Cathedral placed in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Tell us about that style.
Excellent.
It looks like two of them are glued together. Okay.
I think you're right. And so Mobile, as many your listeners know, has a portico, has a pediment and columns. It's mainly a brick building, and the interior is, we talked about it being kind of a basilica, colonnades leading to the apse. This building really does take that idea and add, let's say, high style French, medieval French Gothic ideas to it, with the two towers on the outside, the porch with the two towers. It even has what we call in architecture an attic that is on the facade, another kind of floor between the ground floor and the towers, an attic like Notre Dame. And then, of course, like Notre Dame in Paris, it has a cruciform plan, an ambulatory, a walkway around the altar, around the apse, a separate area. And so in its own little, tiny, small Virginia way, it has some of the best of the medieval cathedrals, as well as, let's say, the early Christian tradition of the basilica.
Tell us a little bit more of its origins, Duncan.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating building. The first thing that people want to know is this is one of the only cathedrals in America that was paid for by one family.
Whoa.
They actually paid. Yes, so the Ryan family, Mr. Ryan was originally from Virginia. He actually grew up Protestant. He converted young, and he made his way in the world on the East Coast, going up eventually to New York City, becoming one of the 10 richest men in America.
Okay. And
so he and his wife, Ida, were very generous in philanthropy to the Catholic Church all over the country. And they like to build buildings or pay for buildings. And actually, they lived near Fifth Avenue or on Fifth Avenue in a palatial house, and they paid for the church down the street, St. John the Baptist. They paid for that building. And one of the architects that worked on it was Joseph Maguire. I think the design really was by an Italian in Torino. But Joseph Maguire worked on this, and they brought him down to Richmond to do the cathedral in, you could say, the home city of Mr. Ryan. And so they built a lot. They lived in New York mainly. They had a house in Virginia, and they built a beautiful stone church in New York and a beautiful stone church cathedral in Richmond. And this brings up your point earlier about Notre Dame in Paris, or the French tradition, is Joseph Maguire, another Irish guy, like a lot of the U.S. at that time, another Irish guy. He studied in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts, which was considered to be the Harvard of architecture schools in the world at the time. And so people, Americans, if they could afford it, would go to France to study, and Maguire learned a lot of what he did in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts.
Okay, school us a little bit on, because everything in Wikipedia is true, right? But the description in Wikipedia said that it is an Italian Renaissance. What does that mean?
Yes, so it's interesting when we, like so many things, as you kind of delve deeper into the aesthetics of a building, we want to give you more specificity. And so we have this traditional cathedral. It's classical. It's in the tradition from antiquity, from Greece and Rome. But then specifically, they're looking for terms to get you closer to that. Italian Renaissance says, well, it looks very Italian. It's got a lot of details that you won't find in other styles, and this amazing coffering on the inside. The inside actually has a lot of color, a lot of polychrome, and that complexity or richness does feel very Italian or very Renaissance. But really, I mean, ultimately, if we're going to be honest, it's McGuire being very inventive in 1900, and he studied with great French examples, and he's got American clients in Virginia. So he's trying to marry all those things together to build this unique cathedral, which replaces, a very small little church in Richmond, built at a time in the 1830s, when there are a very tiny number of Catholics in Richmond. And Ryan says, no, we need a proper Catholic cathedral in Richmond that is, let's say, of the quality of the Protestant churches, which there are many of. Many of the southern cities have lots of beautiful Protestant churches. And so here the Catholics are saying, we've arrived, we're going to do something that's worthy, and something worthy of the city, too. Not kind of in your face, we've arrived, but we've arrived, and we're going to add something beautiful, just like the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians and of course, the Baptists.
Now, do you know about the history, Duncan? Did the Ryan family have any influence in the design? And then were they still around when it was complete?
Yes, so they were part of the process. They were there when it was complete. So they gave what was a very large amount of money to build this cathedral on this nice park, like your cathedral, on a park, on a good location, on a square. They gave $250,000. Now, in today's money, that's probably $25 million. That doesn't sound like a huge amount of money to us, but it went a long way. $250,000 went a long way in those days in building buildings. Mm-hmm. And so it's a stone building. And while I don't know the details, they brought the architect with them from New York. He had worked with them before on Saint-Jean-Baptiste. So this does reflect some of what Mr. and Mrs. Ryan's aesthetics were. They were movers and shakers in the world. They had a collection of antiques, of great furniture. They traveled to Europe. I mean, they were jet setters in 1900. They had as much money as you could want, and they wanted to give some of it to the Catholic Church, and especially to this home diocese. So I speculate that McGuire had a lot to do with it. That the Ryans, the patrons, had a lot to do with it, and Mr. McGuire worked with them. But of course, there's the bishop and the rector. They would have had a lot to say, and so you probably have three groups of people here affecting the design, the symbolism, that great inscription over the front door, if you know my commandments, keep them. Mm-hmm. But I want to make one more point about the Ryans. So they give this $250,000, which is huge amount of money to give to the Catholic Church by one family in 1900, and then they give another $250,000.
What? Okay.
Because the building is costing more than they thought. And that never happens in architecture. Buildings never cost more than they think.
That's right. Yeah, that only happens in home improvement. That's right. Yeah,
in home improvement.
Yeah, in home improvement.
So whoa, wait a minute. Earlier you said $250,000 at the turn of that century was around $25 million. So in essence, they gave about $50 million equivalent?
Yeah, I would say so. And again, it's if we tried to build it today, it's a lot more than that. So, but they gave an extraordinary amount of money for a little cathedral in Richmond, Virginia, and it's one family. And when things got tight or got expensive, they, what do? You say, well, the things are costing too much, so let's pull back. Let's not spend the money. Let's the heck with these. Marble columns on the inside, the heck with all this imported marble from Italy for the altar and the statuary. Why do that? Let's go cheap and keep the budget lower. evidently the Ryans said, no, let's do what Mr. McGuire designed, which is a beautiful design, and we want to do, the best for Richmond and for, where Mr. Ryan, in a sense, where he grew up.
You bring up a really interesting point there. As an architect of churches, how do you interact with, say, the priest or the bishop? How much influence do they have when you are actually doing that blueprint and that design?
I think they have a huge impact. In fact, my view is a lot of the history books don't tell us enough about that relationship, but my view is that a great building and a great church is always two parties that write a sermon in stone, and you need the architect to create this vision and to draw it and design it and work all the technical things out. But you have to have a great patron, a great bishop, great priest to give them the inspiration and push them to go even further than they wanted to. So this is definitely the Bishop of Richmond is giving the ideas about the symbolism, about the stained glass, about the statuary, okaying things. But we do have a very powerful patron here, donor, because they're giving all the money. So now we actually have three people writing this sermon in stone, and it's a magnificent sermon, and it's a little gem, like your cathedral. It's a little gem, and that's why I like it. This is something that, while expensive and beautiful, is something that is kind of doable today, and really inspirational for everybody.
Oh, very interesting. One of the things about cathedrals, and even to include our cathedral in Mobile, they are a testament to time. They are kind of a history lesson in stone. So they're living and breathing, and they move with the time. They're not static.
Yes.
Even to the last, yes. They are. So when even the very, very early cathedrals, it took years and years and generations to build those things. I mean, you didn't just pop one up. Even
yes.
Our cathedral in the past week, they had to add Wi-Fi to it because our Archbishop Emeritus, he passed away. They needed to live stream it. Someone had to climb up to the spire, put a little thing. I mean, but I know when I was watching him do this, I thought, something, this really is a testament to the history of our humanity in many, many ways. This is our book, our story, these cathedrals of how they interact with time. Would you say that?
Oh, I love what you just said, Michelle. They are a testament, and they're a testament, even though we're emphasizing the bishop and the Ryans and the architects, they're not a private building for those people. They're for the community. They're for the Catholics. They're for the people who aren't Catholic yet. They're meant to draw all men unto Christ. And so, and you make a very good point, the Wi-Fi on the tower in Mobile. Our buildings keep changing. Our buildings keep being added to and changed and modified, and that's okay. Now, I say that's okay. It's not always okay because sometimes we do a bad job. We need to take care to respect what's there and to do it beautifully. But Sacred Heart Cathedral and many other cathedrals, you'll see renovations that have been done. Some are better than others. The stained glass was all replaced around the 1950s, and it looks like it. It's fine. It's nice. It's very dark, which is the aesthetic of the 50s, prayerful. It's not 1900 stained glass. There are other things that are done in the sanctuary. They have a thrust, what we call thrust stage, where the altar is brought out to under the dome. Some of these things are good. Some of these things aren't so good. But it's a normal part of our life that we continue to use these houses of God. And so we found in studying American churches that usually you renovate the church every 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
And that's kind of amazing. You spend some money, and some of it may be kind of restorative, but usually we renovate every 20 years, and we modify this, and we modify the baptismal font, and we add a statue, or we change the statue or the artwork, or we redo. Hopefully, every 20 years we're making it more and more beautiful, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's two steps forward and one step backward, and certainly in my lifetime, much of the renovations haven't been positive, but we're finding in the last decade or two that there's a movement back to doing things that are beautifying that. But renovations are here to stay for good and bad. Let's try to make them good.
And we've seen a witness to time with our cathedrals and our churches, both in the United States and France, over the past 3 months, maybe even the past year, where people are just trying to destroy churches. They're trying to destroy cathedrals. It's not just Catholic churches that are under fire. And we had a spectacular fire at a beautiful cathedral that I have visited, the Cathedral of Nantes. And it's they have declared that it is arson. So these structures, I guess, even being under attack, are a testament to the time that we live in.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Fire has been one of the great enemies of buildings and especially cathedrals. And it's one of those enemies that's hard to defend against once it starts. Today, we're better at defending it. We have fancy fire departments and water pumping and so on. But historically, if there's a fire at St. Paul outside the walls in Rome, it just burns. There's not much you can do about it. And so it has been one of the great enemies. And so it's very sad and maybe even scary to see these great buildings in Europe and in America. We've seen things in America as well being, catching on fire, whether from mistakes or electrical fire, or in this case, it seems that there's arson. Is that right? Are they thinking that Nantes is arson, or they're still not sure?
No, I think they've arrested somebody in Nantes. I could be wrong, but that's what I heard kind of on French news. So I don't know,
And the arson is interesting because if you don't like something or don't believe in something, how do you attack the faith? How do you attack things that you don't agree with? And buildings, for good or bad, often are the people often do attack buildings. And when historically people would invade a city and they would destroy the temple, or they destroy the governor's house. And so the temple has been we think of it as a symbol of peace and of humanity and welcome. But those who don't believe may see it as something heretical or, antagonistic. And what it makes me think of course, there's many examples, but it makes me think of particularly the great iconoclastic movements that we know of from the French Revolution, and then its predecessor in the Protestant Reformation, where one of the things to attack with these two movements, Protestantism and then you could say atheism or almost atheism, communism, was to destroy churches.
Right.
And so you destroy the church, you cut off the heads of the kings, you destroy the statues, and we're seeing that today, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Duncan Stroik, it's always such a delight to have you on. We are so honored to be able to talk to you about America's great cathedrals. We look forward to talking to you next week. Up next is Father Connor Plesla with the Sunday Gospel Reflection, LA Catholic Morning.
Home is where the heart is, and my heart lives by the bay. If home is where the heart is, then my heart lives